Okay, in our previous lectures, we've talked about becoming a better listener so you can be a better speaker. We've talked about analyzing our audience so we can relate our information to a specific audience and we can be more effective that way. And we've also looked at other things that are going to help us get ready to speak, specifically informative speaking and some things that are inherent to that particular purpose when we speak. Today we're going to look at structuring our ideas, supporting ideas first, then structuring, and then outlining those. So to begin, and let me remind you that these lectures do not take the place of reading your text. I can prepare you only so well in covering the information in your chapter, but you need to really get in that chapter in order to be adequately prepared to succeed in this first speech and in all your speeches. So looking at the functions of supporting material, the support we're going to give to the main ideas. Remember, last time we talked about researching a topic and then narrowing down that focus and then starting the frame of that topic for your speech. So what kind of support do we need? At first we're going to look at what the functions of that support will be. You want to arouse and sustain interest. You want to explain the meaning of your ideas, and that's what support does. Make your interpretations credible, because you're going to have some of your own input, obviously. Otherwise, it'd just be a book that we could go read. You want to point out importance of things, and that's what support does. And you want to verify controversial statements that you may make, and that becomes fairly important in persuasive speech. So what types of support are available to us to use in our speeches? Well, there are four, actually, and you want to use a combination of these depending on what your speech text is. Facts and statistics, testimony, and there's three kinds of testimony. We touched on that briefly the other day. Examples, and then narratives. So let's look at these. First, facts and statistics. I've already mentioned to you that they're the most objective form of support. They're honored by American culture. Facts and statistics are honored by American culture as the highest form of knowledge. But when you interpret those facts and you're adding your judgment or you're adding value, and for listeners, when your speaker's doing that, then that turns that fact into a claim. So later on we do persuasion. That's something really to bear in mind. Am I hearing the fact or am I hearing the speaker's claim? When we're looking at facts and stats as evidence. So a little note for later on. And then without authority, our facts and statistics, if there's no authority for that, and we're just hearing what the speaker is saying, then that is actually an opinion, and you don't want to confuse that with a fact or a statistic. So just to be aware of what's what when we're looking at what the speaker is telling us and what you're going to be telling your audience. Authority is the key when we're talking about where we're getting that information, where we're getting our facts, where we're getting our statistics. Authority, or those sources, possess ethos just like a speaker does. Ethos, it's a Greek term, and it means credibility. So a speaker has already worked hard to establish that credibility, and then if your sources don't also possess that kind of credibility, then you're going to start losing that audience because they're going to see through that. So you want to make sure that you are aware and are being aware of and avoiding disinformation. Disinformation is misplaced or fragmented, irrelevant, or superficial information. So just make sure, and we talked yesterday about looking at sources, just make sure that these are credible. And we have some tests for those, and I'm going to go over some of those again today. So statistics, looking at that part. Precise, this part of supporting material. Precise factual statements. Precise is the key. They help to verify the claims that you're making, so they back you up, and they help to make comparisons or contrasts. When you're talking about numerical statistics, you're talking about things that describe size, that can make predictions, illustrate trends, show relationships. An example of that I think maybe early 1960s, a study was released that predicted, based on how many women were starting to enter the workforce. This is post-1950, post-World War II. Women started entering the workforce, and so the prediction was made on that statistical data, on that input, that by the turn of the century, by the year 2000, more women would be in the workforce than would be in the home. In fact, upwards of 70-80%. Well, in 1962-63, when that study was conducted, no way. That just wasn't going to happen. That was a major social shift. But those statistics didn't lie. And that trend that they illustrated, that prediction that they made, actually came to be. When you're looking at selection of the facts and statistics that you're going to run across in your research, you want to use those critical listening skills that we talked about in Chapter 1 lecture. You want to consider how relevant are they for your specific purpose and your thesis statement. Always go back to those, and is what I'm gathering here, is what I want to add, is it going to benefit that? Is it going to serve that? Is it going to get my listener closer to the goal that I've set for this speech? How recent are they? Old facts, old statistics don't work very well. How credible is the source? Who did the survey? If you've got a study and 3 people were in that study, or you've got a study that is flawed in just the study instrument itself, then look at that. Is that credible? Is that reliable information? So when you give your facts and statistical support in your speech, there are 3 different techniques that you can utilize to frame those. Because just to stand here and spill off a bunch of numerical information, your audience's eyes will glaze over. And while I'm here, I want to say this. You want to make this user-friendly, ear-friendly for your audience. So what you want to do is frame those in rounded off numbers. Instead of saying 3.62947, you want to say approaching 4. Or over 3.5, something like that. You want to round those things off so your audience, it's easier for them to process when you're giving that information. So when you do frame statistics, there are several ways to choose from. One is to do it as a definition. And this is where you're translating technical terms, if the facts contain those, to translate technical terms into plain speak. Think of, and we're going to talk about this in a subsequent chapter text today, think of it's expanded conversation. That is your goal. So conversation does not contain a lot of higher language conversation. You seek to be understood. Well, in speaking, it's the same thing. You are seeking to be understood. Another way to frame a fact or a statistic is to do it as an explanation. This is where you're clarifying a topic. You're demonstrating how something works. So explaining it in if you're offering that fact or offering that statistic is a way, again, that makes it more palatable for your audience members, easier for them to process the information. The last way to choose from is a description. And obviously word pictures come to mind. These help the listeners visualize the data that you're giving them. Every semester when I teach face-to-face classes, I offer this example. It's a little difficult to do on this tape, but I've got 25, 30 students in that class setting. I will point to each one and say, you, not you, not you, you, not you, not you, you, and I'll go through the entire class pointing to individual students. They start to figure out that this one yes, 2 no's, this one yes, 2 no's. And then I announce, we'll graduate from college. The statistic is that 1 out of 3 freshmen or undergrads who are currently in college seats will not finish their degrees. They may get 3/4 of the way there, they may get almost to the finish, but they will not receive that degree. It's a startling statistic. It's a relevant statistic for a college audience, but it's better stated the way I do it than to just give that 1 out of 3. The impact you can see is greater, especially for those who are, what do you mean not me? Another form of support for your speech, for your main ideas of your speech, is testimony. When we give testimony, we're citing the words or the ideas of other people, and we do that in a couple of ways. We can do it as direct quotes, and that's if those quotes are powerful. If you paraphrase that and you're going to lose the essence of what that speaker has said, what that expert has said, then you want to use direct quotes. So when you're doing interviews, if you do that as part of your research, you want to make sure you get that quote down verbatim. The other way would be to paraphrase. And that is where you restate it in your own terms. Many times, in your own words, many times that's going to be just as effective. So it's up to you to choose when you are using testimony as support. Will you directly quote or will you paraphrase? Either way, you need to cite the source, of course. Just because you put it in your words does not take away the ownership of that idea or that concept. There are 3 types of testimony you have to choose from. There's expert testimony, lay, and then prestige testimony. And I can go through all the things that you're seeing on this slide while I'm talking, but I'll give you an example instead. There is a former actress named Victoria Principal, and she was on a 1980s soap, a nighttime soap called Dallas, and she's done other movies. And she has started some years ago, a skincare line. And you see her on television infomercials that she has, and she's on QVC, Home Shopping, all of those kinds of things, and selling her product. She probably figured out she can make more doing that than she could acting. So in those infomercials, you will see her utilize expert testimony. She has a clinician, someone who studied the science of skin products, skin care, and Kathy Rinker Gunther, I'm not sure of her name. And so in the white coat, you'll always see they're in white coats, think of proactive commercials, those kinds of things. So they have the expert in the white coat. And this lends credibility because people are going to remember hierarchy of needs, remember Maslow's needs. We need to feel safe. Well, we want to know what she's asking us to put on our face to look years younger, to have better skin and all that, is actually safe for us to use. So the expert is necessary. She offers that expert testimony. So again, this is very important when it's something that's innovative, you've not used it before, you've not seen it before, unfamiliar, technical, or controversial. The next type of testimony that Victoria includes in her infomercials is lay testimony. And the way she does this is she is in a car and she rolls up to a house and she walks it just in middle America, just, Main Street, USA, and she goes up to the door of this house, knocks on the door, and it is a customer. It's someone who has bought her product, purchased her product. And she knocks on the door and the woman comes to the door. Oh, Victoria, oh, I can't believe you're here. It's so exciting. And she's so thrilled that whoever created this product, and then of course she gives testimony about it. Oh, it's the best thing I've ever used. My husband says I look 15 years younger. My girlfriends want to know what my secret is. Have I had plastic surgery, etc., etc. So that lay testimony has an impact that the expert testimony doesn't. It influences us in a way that scientifically does not. So lay testimony, you can see, has value. And they're called testimonials when someone offers that kind of testimony. The last kind of testimony that Victoria includes in her infomercials is prestige testimony. And this is where she'll have the likes of Heather Locklear. I can't think of all the different actresses she's had, but definite beauty queens, people who are extremely attractive. They are cast because of their beauty in certain roles. And they'll be on there and say, this helps me to work, to get better roles than I would otherwise. It's been wonderful for my skin. I look well, I feel great, and so it's career. It helps their career. So this kind of prestige testimony also influences us in a way that lay does not, and in a way that expert does not. So you can see the value of all of these. I'm not sure when actors started lending their names to things, but I even remember the great John Wayne selling aspirin. So definite prestige testimony has been used for a long, long time. And when I say that, I want to draw your attention to, in the case of prestige testimony, older is better usually. Your audience or your listener is wanting to know, is this something that's standing the test of time? So in this case, where all the other types of evidence that you may offer, the support you may give in your speech, that is where your listener is going to hear, how long has this been out? How long has this been working? How long can I trust that this is going to be good? All right, when we evaluate testimony, again, how relevant is it? What's the context of it? Does it have any bias? We do look for that little disclaimer that states, this actor was not paid any money, or this spokesperson was not paid any money. That gives us an assurance to some degree of no bias. But you want to make sure that there's not an agenda behind the testimony that you're offering. How recent is it? I've indicated why would older be better sometimes, and you know the case of that. And then how accurate is it? So test for those things the best you can before you include that as part of your support in your speech. The third type of support that you can choose from, and again, you mix and match, you choose whatever works at the time, and I talk a little later, your text has a nice list for you of use this support when this is what you've got, what you've got going on with your speech. So verbal illustrations, examples, these are very powerful. And we probably use examples more than any other kind of support in a speech when something may be a little unclear. So it helps to clarify, it helps to arouse attention We want to get our audience's attention, and using examples many times is the best way to do that. It also helps us sustain interest. Our eyes start to glaze over when it's just data, 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 data. So when we offer an example, it's a little rest for the brain, and it gets kind of reels your audience back in. Providing concrete examples is a wonderful way to authenticate the concepts that you're offering when something's fairly abstract. To personalize a topic and humanize your message. An example works well to do that. And then the audience will actually experience the meaning of your ideas through examples. So choose them wisely, choose them well, and use them not sparingly. And then providing emphasis. This is another benefit of using an example in a speech. To emphasize something. If you've stated it and you've bothered to then offer an example, your audience intuitively believes or hears that this must be important because I'm hearing it twice. I'm hearing the first in concept and then I'm hearing it with an example. So what types? Fairly easy, brief or extended, factual or hypothetical. So when we offer a brief example, just a specific instance that demonstrates what we're talking about. Extended is obviously going to be a little more detailed. These are no-brainers. Factual versus hypothetical, neither one has better merit. It depends on, just offhand, but it depends on what you're illustrating. What are you illustrating will determine, is a factual example going to work better or is hypothetical? So that's up to you to decide which will have more impact. You want to evaluate examples. Anytime you're offering support, you want to evaluate. You evaluate in terms of how relevant they are, how representative they are. If they don't represent what you're talking about, it's only going to confuse your audience. And how believable they are, especially in the case of a hypothetical. Application. Do they apply? And are they relevant? If they're not, then you want to eliminate that and choose a different form of support. Our last form of supporting material are narratives. Narratives are similar to an extended example, but they go further. They tell a story. So it's going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Here are the benefits. They draw your listeners into the action, especially if you use dialogue. Dialogue is more, it enlivens it. It's more engaging. They are very effective in an introduction. A conclusion also, because it's a wonderful concluding remark or focal point for that close of your speech, but you're going to have to be pretty crisp and efficient with the delivery of a narrative in a conclusion, because conclusion is shorter than an introduction. I'll go ahead and tell you now, introductions should be about, oh my goodness, up to 20% of your speech. Up to 20% of your speech. So if you have a 5-minute speech, you're talking about a full minute, because you need to set the groundwork. You need to lay the groundwork and set the stage and the mood and get your audience involved before you get into the body of the speech. Conclusion, you want crisper and tighter, no more than 10 to 15%. So you can see that using a narrative probably work really well in an introduction, but would have to be a lot shorter, crisper, cleaner, more efficiently delivered in a close. Another thing that narratives do is to encourage desirable transformations. What does that mean? A moral to the story. We like to hear a moral to the story. So the moral to the story is, you want that as that little story ends, then obviously behavior, identity, those kinds of things are improved. Another function of narratives, another benefit, is that they stimulate constructive listening. Your audiences, that higher form of listening. Remember, we talked about empathic, and we talked about appreciative, and we talked about critical. The highest phase or level of listening is constructive. So a narrative will help stimulate that. And then finally, and this is absolutely last but not least, personal narratives impact your audience. They increase the identification between the speaker and the audience, and they also bridge cultural differences. We find through personal narratives, through personal stories, that we're more alike than we are different. And that's going to be a big plus in connecting and maintaining that connection with your audience. There are 3 techniques we can use to use any of these supporting materials: facts and statistics, examples, narratives, testimony, all of the forms of supporting material. The techniques to use would be to use them in comparison, use them in contrast, or use them as an analogy. An analogy being just a combination of the principles of comparing and contrasting. So you have these ways to offer these kinds of support. So, and this lends itself to having a flow to your speech, to having the best possible way to deliver the information that you're giving them. When you choose your supporting materials, you want to consult your textbook. I've already mentioned this. Consult your textbook because the authors have really done a nice job of giving us this type of, a little laundry list of this type of support works well with this kind of speech text. If you have a controversial idea, then your authors tell you these types of support will help that. Abstract ideas, technical concepts or subjects, when you want to evoke emotion, when you want to diminish or lessen emotion, when your topic is distant, when it's really difficult to get that local application that's so important for an audience to maintain interest. And then when your ideas are novel. So look in your text and follow the advice of those authors on what kind of support will work well for you. Okay, that's pretty much supporting materials. We want to move now to putting those pieces together. All the things we've talked about so far, our research, our support that we've gained, our main ideas. Let's look at how we're going to structure that speech in Chapter 8. To be effective when you're presenting, I can't stress it enough, think simple. So you want to use simple ideas, simple principles to put all of your information together to be an effective speaker. First thing, you want to limit your main ideas. No more than 4. I told you in my example of Texas flags that 4 would really kind of push it for a 4 to 5 minute speech, but I could get them in. 3 is a good working number. It's real easy to handle and you have adequate time to develop all 3 of those ideas to the best of your ability. Using subpoints also, keeping things simple, using subpoints will help extend the meaning of ideas. That's what their function is. So if they're not extending the meaning of your main idea that they're listed under, get rid of it. Make sure that it is extending the meaning because if it's not serving that function, it doesn't need to be in that speech. Also balance your presentation. You want to adequately develop your introduction, your body of your speech, and your conclusion. And in the introduction, as I said yesterday, you want to tell us what you're going to tell us. In the body, you tell us. And in the conclusion, tell us what you told us. This is not something where you're reading or your audience has the benefit of written text to follow along or to go back and say, what did I miss? So this repetition is key to having the best understanding that your audience can have. So you're building that in so they fully get the meaning of your message. You want to also simplify that body text and you want to make the decision of how to best arrange that. Is ascending order going to work better given the information you're giving? In other words, from less to greater? Is descending order going to work better for your speech text from greater to lesser information? Or do all the things and all of your main ideas have equal emphasis? Is it going to work better that you equally emphasize all of them? These are decisions that you make given your topic, given the focus, and when you start to look at how you're going to organize the material, it's your decision to make based on what your speech is. When you organize your ideas, you want to use those principles we talked about in our previous lectures. Similarity, proximity, and closure. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because we've already gone over that. But consult your text and determine, is this a categorical design type topic? Is this sequential or spatial? Am I looking at a physical relationship here? So would principle of proximity be the best way to organize my main thoughts? Or how about closure? Is this a cause and effect situation? Let me caution you, I can't do it enough. To be sure you stop short when you're looking at cause effect or effect cause. Stop short of problem solution. That is a persuasive organization scheme. That is persuasive in purpose, persuasive in intent, and that's not what you're doing when you're informing. So you don't want to recommend anything in an informative speech. You don't want to urge your audience to choose something, to act, to adopt, to solve or resolve. So you certainly need to stop short of solutions. You're just clarifying options or pointing out this happened because of this. Now, strengthening your main points. What do we need to do? Use all the forms of support that I've talked about today, not necessarily all 4 in one speech, but use those that are going to have the greatest impact and going to make the best speech occasion for you, and illustrate to your audience in the best way your ideas, your message. It's important to note, and I just did that without one, it's important to note when we're talking about our organization of our speech text, we're talking about our support that we're going to offer, we're talking about how we're going to convey that to the audience, it's very important to frame effective transitions. Transitions, that language that's going to move your audience from one of your ideas to the next idea. So these are, I'm going to give you a couple of examples that are very effective as transitions. One is an internal preview. Now you're going to preview your entire speech in your introduction. But an internal preview is kind of a sneak peek at a little bit of detail that's coming up. Very effective because it kind of generates interest. Oh, she's going to be talking about that. An internal summary is also very effective. This is where you condense and repeat your previously stated ideas. And what this does is helps the audience to kind of make the trip with you, to look at the bigger picture, to apply that detail to the whole of what you're saying. Because you start getting bogged down in details and you forget, what are we talking about again? So use internal previews, use internal summaries, and also use variety. The last thing we want to hear when we're an audience member listening to a speech is, my next thing I'm going to talk about is, or secondly, thirdly, fourthly, it doesn't offer the variety that helps us to pay attention and generates that interest that we're looking to sustain. So chapter 8 has a handy little chart that gives you some transition language choices. So be sure to look at that because that will add that variety you're looking for and help your audience to sustain the interest that you've created. Looking at this organization that we're doing, the structure that we're doing of our speech, remember the 3 main parts. There's the introduction, there's the body, and there's the conclusion. In the introduction, we want to gain attention. How do we do that? There's several ways. You've got a list here you can go back and refer to, also in your text. To involve the audience is wonderful. Asking a literal or a rhetorical question is one way to involve the audience. How many of you, when you start with that, your audience, she's asking a question, so I need to think about how I'm going to answer that. To tell a story, I've already talked about a narrative and how engaging that can be from the outset of your speech. To use humor. Always wonderful. Humor is the great common denominator. To develop suspense, I'm going to tell you today about X, and you never really state what X is until you give all the descriptions of it throughout the speech, and at the end you reveal what X was. That's a wonderful attention gain. Beginning with a quotation. But let me warn you, when you are quoting, if that's how you choose to engage your audience in your introduction, you want to choose a quote that you can nail verbatim without reading it. And that may mean you have to shorten the quote you're going to use. Use a shorter quote. Because the effect of being able to recite a quote without stammering and stuttering or without looking down and reading it, Mark Twain said, yada, yada, yada. It loses it because you've lost that eye contact. You have kind of separated yourself from the audience at the time that you're trying to connect with them. And your introduction is when you do that. So you want to begin with a quote that you can nail, that you can recite perfectly. Use a visual aid. Caution you about this also. It must work in your introduction. It must serve some purpose in your introduction. Just to pull it out, to use it because it'll gain attention, there must be a rhyme and reason to it. So don't offer a visual aid just because you know you need to gain their attention and you pull it out and it's misplaced. Make sure that it works in that intro. And then finally, to startle your listeners. And I had an example of this some semesters ago. Students were, it was a business and professional class, a speech class I was teaching. And a student got up, they were in departments, and this particular student worked in human resources in our mock department in that class. And she got up to give her speech, and she was going to talk about, the topic of her speech was violence in the workplace. And she walked up to the podium, just where I stand now, and she looked at the audience, and she slammed her hand down on the podium. Let me see, I can do it harder. And she said, I won't be wronged. I won't be burdened. I don't do these things to other people. I require the same from them. And I was taken aback because it is a John Wayne quote. I had to step back. What's she talking about? How would she know that? Well, as it turned out, I had that quotation on the bottom of personal email. I never sent it when I sent things to students, but one day the university email wasn't working and I had to use my personal email to communicate with different departments in that class, and it was a tagline that was on the bottom of that. Now, was she, sucking up? Maybe so, but it worked. She got my attention because I thought it was odd that she would choose that quote, and she got the class's attention because it was startling. It was startling how she delivered that. So these are ways that you can gain your audience's attention. Choose one of those to use in your introduction. And then another function you want to make sure that you serve in your introduction is to establish credibility. Your knowledge, your personal experience, but you can't just assume we know that. So you need to increase your credibility and show us that you've done this. Make sure that you state it in that introduction by either selecting a topic that you know, researching so you qualify yourself as someone who knows about this topic, and make sure again that you allude which is it that you're offering us. Why would we listen to you about this particular subject? The final function of an introduction, the final element you want to make sure that you include in this tell us what you're going to tell us introduction is you want to preview your message. And you want to do that by including a listing of your main points. When you fail to do this, your audience does not know where you're going to take them. I like to think of an introduction as a tour guide. You're getting, maybe into a boat or onto a bus, and a tour guide telling you, today we're going to see A, B, C, and D. I'm going to take you to see these things. I'm going to show you these things. Just like that tour guide, you as the speaker give that preview in your introduction of where you're taking your audience. Jumping over the body and into the conclusion, that's the tell us what you already told us. You want to make sure that you summarize. And that summary does the same thing the preview did. Recap where it is you took the audience. Recap what main ideas your speech contained. So make sure that you have that preview in the introduction and that summary in the conclusion, so your audience has that repetition that, I can't stress enough, is so vital. For remember, 48 hours later, they're going to remember it. Another aspect of the conclusion, another element that you need to make sure you work on, is to have a focal point, concluding remarks, something kind of a take that with you so you remember that, so that your audience remembers that. So again, here's a laundry list of things you can do. You can involve the audience, you can ask questions, you can tell, again, a brief story, you can end with a quote. It may even be you revisit the quote that you started with, or you can offer a striking metaphor. So choose one of these, make sure it works well for your particular speech. Again, that representative relevance, make sure that whatever you choose as your focal point and as your attention gain at the beginning is representative and relevant for your speech text, and then wrap up your speech with a memorable or remembered focal point. Okay, that was Chapter 8. Let me see. We've looked at supporting materials. We've looked at how to structure our speech. And we're going to finish up this lecture with blueprints for success. And that would be outlining your speech. So why do we outline? Why do I have to outline a speech? Why are we choosing that as opposed to writing out a speech? Or why are we choosing that as opposed to just giving the speech? Get up and organize my ideas and get up and give that speech. Because when you outline, it ensures that your ideas are fully developed. It also ensures that the structure of your speech is coherent. A working outline, and there's 3 different animals we're going to talk about. We've got a working outline, we've got a formal outline, which is required for every speech you give in this class, and we've got a keyword outline. So what are the differences? Well, starting with working outline, that helps you keep your eye on the ball. Remember, you're going to be getting a lot of data together, you're going to be getting a lot of information together, and it's easy to get lost in all that. So your working outline helps you to ensure what you're going to include is serving your purpose, is satisfying and getting you closer to your goal, your thesis statement, your central idea of your speech. So working outline's a tentative plan. There's even a working outline worksheet in your toolbox that's in your electronic text. So use that. You'll be able to print it out multiple times and use that. And you start by writing down, here's my topic, my specific purpose, and my thesis statement. These three things need to be nailed down before you start structuring that speech, before you start doing any of the outlining. Make sure that you have, because this is your, hey, that's my guidepost. That's how I'm going to know what to include, what to leave out. Looking at the principles of outlining, and I know this is an exam question, so you probably want to pay attention to this particular slide. The principles of outlining are coordination and subordination. Pretty simple. Coordination, you want a consistent pattern of symbols and indentation. And subordination, you want to make sure greater information is not subordinate to lesser information. So your detail, your support, should be clearly under the main idea that it is illustrating, that it is offering support for. And you also, under subordination, want parallel construction. You know, if you're using nouns, well, since all of your outline elements need to be complete sentences except for the specific purpose, except for the title, all those others need to be complete sentences. All of yours, obviously, all of those elements of the outline will start with a noun, proper or otherwise. So, here's a sample of what your outline should start to look like. Main idea, you can see subpoint is subordinated and indented, and then your subpoints, your detail, is then indented more and also subordinate to the subpoint. And I will tell you this, if you have an A, you must have a B. If you have a 1, you must have a 2. That doesn't mean you need to have, you can see here on the slide that my subpoint A has sub or more detail, but my subpoint B doesn't. That's okay. Not every subpoint you have is going to have extended detail. But if I drop down under B and put a 1, I've got to come up with a 2. Otherwise, I've got to incorporate what was in that numerical, or I'm sorry, alpha 1 under B. I'm going to have to incorporate that into the larger point. So if you have a 1, you must have a 2. If you have an A, you must have a B. Otherwise, you lose some points on that part of your outline. So this is a form to come back and look at so you can be sure that you're following correct form. Some guidelines. Follow the formal outline that's in your e-text, in your electronic textbook. Use that format. It's in Chapter 10. Don't confuse that with your working outline. I can't state that enough. I have students every semester that turn in the working outline and then they lose points. We're looking for a formal outline. So use the sample in Chapter 10 as your guide. You want to make sure it's fully developed. You want to make sure that it has a labeled 3-part structure: introduction, body, and conclusion. And then you want complete sentences, can't stress that enough, and label your transitions. So what does this animal look like? Here on your slide, you can see that you're going to label and include your title, your topic, your specific purpose, and your thesis statement. That's right off the bat. Then dropping down to the introduction, the 3 things that I've indicated need to be included. And you'll note that credibility material in your text, that the sample that's in the text says to repeat your thesis statement there. No, we want credibility material. Because that's going to really urge you to include it because it needs to be on that outline, so therefore you'll include it in that introduction when you get up to give your speech. And your preview, I think your sample rather, in the formal outline in your book has 2 sentences. You need to nail your preview and your summary statement, 1 single declarative sentence. You'll see where we have the transitions. Moving to the body, you can see the detail and how you structure that, and then the conclusion, your summary statement and your concluding remarks that include your focal point. At the end, and we want it on a separate page. I think your sample in your text shows it added to it or extended at the bottom. But you want a separate page for your works cited and attaching that to your outline. APA style is what we require in this course. There's a link in your syllabus. There's a link on the Vista site for an online style guide, online APA style guide. So you're not going to have to spend a lot of time looking that up, going to the library and finding that thick book that tells you. And APA, by the way, is the American Psychological Association, and they developed a style guide just like there's the Chicago style. There's AP style for media. There's all different kinds of style guides. But APA is what we encourage you to use in this class, because if you continue your education in graduate work, in graduate school, or later on even for doctoral, that is the required style guide. So you might as well learn it now and not have to relearn one. Now, many of you are probably familiar with MLA that you used when you were in high school. So APA, learn that one now, and it's going to serve you as long as you're in school. The last type of outlining we're going to talk about is a keyword outline. Now, keyword outline, remember we have working, we've got the formal. The keyword outline is for you. It's on a note card. It's on a single note card. Yes, you're to reduce your speech to a single note card. And this serves as your prompts or your cues for the progression of your ideas. That's what it's doing. You'll bring that card up when you give your speech, because you don't want to read to your audience, and this card is going to ensure that you don't. It should be brief, obviously, if it's going to fit on a card. It should be legible. The last thing we want to see is a speaker up here. What did I write? So you want to make sure that you can read it, and those prompts serve you. All right, that wraps up this particular lecture. We're only going to have one more before you're ready to give your informative speeches. So next time you tune in, we're going to see Chapter 10, Presentation Aids, and we're going to see Chapter 11, How to Effectively Present Your Speech. Thank you.